Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you've never been here before, my name is Bryn. I am transgender and non-binary, and I make videos about this topic. Today's video is going to be a little different. I'm going to have a few different stories, I guess, of things that I want to talk about. Before I get started, I do want to say, when I first started this channel, I talked a lot about my cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease that messes with my lungs, my digestive system, my pancreas, a bunch of things. For me, it's mostly the lungs. What I wanted to touch on today or talk about or whatever are these different experiences that I've had with being trans and being in the hospital, going to doctor's visits, things like that, because medical places have been a big part of my life because with having CF, I have ongoing treatment, all that kind of stuff. And I've had some not so pleasant experiences with being trans and going to the doctor or the hospital or whatever. So I wanted to talk about those. This is hopefully going to be, not really fun because like these are all horrible stories, but hopefully maybe a little bit entertaining rather than like kind of discussing a nuanced topic. So if you like this kind of thing, let me know. I might be able to do more things like this. If it's not your cup of tea, you can also let me know so I know. I'm always interested in what all of you are interested in hearing because that's the purpose of my YouTube channel is to put stuff out there that people like. So just let me know if you like it, if you don't, whatever. But yeah, so let's get started. The first incident. This is probably maybe the worst one on the list, or maybe, I don't know. I have 4 different stories that I want to talk about, but this one specifically, it took place, I don't know, it took place sometime in 2020. It was after the pandemic hit, and as I said, medical places have been a big part of my life, and whenever I go on antibiotics, most of the time I have to go into the hospital to get them started, and because I go on intravenous antibiotics, and to do that they need to access my port, which I'll get into. And so now I've actually been able to just do it at home and not have to go into the hospital, but for a while there I would go into the hospital to get it started and then head home and finish up my antibiotics. So this story takes place when I still had to go into the hospital. The reason that I need intravenous antibiotics is because they're the strongest kind and I get frequent lung infections because of my CF. And normally the way that it works, this is gonna sound a little weird because most people when they go into the hospital, it's like all of a sudden, whatever. But because whenever I go on antibiotics, it's not urgent. It's like, oh, I noticed that my lungs are deteriorating. I should probably get on some medicine. And so what I do, I reach out to my doctor. They set up a room in the hospital. And then after they set up the room, they call me. And then I just go in later that day. That way I have time to pack all my stuff and whatever. So this particular time, I had emailed my doctor and everything, and they set up a room. But because COVID was going on, things were a little bit different. So they told me to go to the emergency room, which is normally what I do. I go there and then they just tell me to go up to my room. But because COVID was going on, they said they didn't know how to get me up to my room or whatever. Like they were worried if I went through the ER that I would catch COVID if I didn't have it, but that if I went through the regular way, like the main entrance, that I could give COVID to people if I had it. Because since CF is a lung problem, the symptoms are somewhat similar to COVID, and so they want to test me for COVID before just like sending me on my merry way. So anyways, I had to wait for like an hour and a half. That was wonderful. I also hadn't eaten dinner, so just keep in mind I'm standing around for an hour and a half waiting for somebody to show up and tell me where to go because I couldn't go anywhere, and I hadn't eaten. So that kind of sets, you know how people get when they don't eat. Whew, like emotions were running high already. And so eventually they had a nurse come in like a special gown or whatever and take me to a room, which was a COVID room. And then once they deemed me not having COVID, they would send me to a normal room. And so to get into the port, because this is what actually matters. So I have a port right here. See where that little like red place is? That's where they normally put the needle in, I think. I don't know. But basically there's a thing under my skin, and they put a needle in it, and then they put like tape around it and stuff to keep it in place and to keep it sanitized. And then there's a tube hanging, and I hook up my antibiotics with that tube. So as you can guess, in order to do this, you have to take off your shirt, whatever. So I did, and I was wearing trans tape. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like a special kind of tape that a lot of non-binary people and trans men use. And it basically flattens your chest or smooths it out so you don't have to wear a binder or anything like that. A lot of people will use it to go swimming so that they can be shirtless. I use it to help smooth out my chest. And I had it probably like down here, and my port is up here. And I've had this happen before where they put the tape on and they didn't have to remove my tape. But I did bring extra tape because I just had a feeling that like they were gonna make me remove it, and whatever. So I brought extra just in case. But this is probably worse than you're thinking. It's not just like, oh, I had to take off my tape. No. So I'm in there, and I take off my shirt and everything, and the nurse asks me, can I take this tape off for you? I think I said, no, I'd rather leave it on. You know, you can just put the tape higher or something simple. And out of nowhere, she puts her hand down and grabs it and just rips it right off. And I was just like in complete shock. I'm like laying on my back in complete like shock. I'm like, what just happened? And so I tell her, which I'm proud of myself for because I usually don't speak up in like social situations like this, but I've been getting better at it. But anyways, I just looked at her and I was like, I told you no. And she like got this look in her eyes, and she's like, oh my God, like, I'm so sorry. She's like trying to put it back on. I'm like, like, that's not how this works. And so then I'm like, just forget it. And so then she's like accessing my port with the needle and putting the tape on and everything. And by that point, I'm like crying because I go through different phases where I have a lot of dysphoria over my chest, and I have other phases where doesn't. Also, I forgot to mention that I have a video about my chest dysphoria and stuff like that. I'll leave that in the tags above, or the cards, or whatever it's called. And I'll also leave it in the description box below for you. And of course, this is one of the phases where it bothered me. So I'm laying there and I don't have tape over my chest, which is already dysphoric. Not to mention this person just ripped tape off of my chest, so it hurts. And that's also like, what are you doing? Like, you wouldn't do that to like anyone else. Like, if like a cisgender woman was like wearing something underneath her shirt, you're not just gonna rip it off. So that was pretty terrible. I think she just didn't hear me because it was kind of loud. They had special airflow into the room, but you know, in my head, I'm still just like, if you don't hear the answer, you ask again, or you say, huh? You know what I mean? Like, you don't just go ahead. So that was absolutely terrible. I cried a lot, traumatized, you know, whatever. I'm like making light of it, but it honestly really, really sucked. And if any of you are wondering, yes, I did reach out. I did tell the people in charge, and supposedly they talked to her, and supposedly they're getting more training on trans and non-binary people. But to me, why do you need training to know not to rip something off of somebody's chest after they tell you no? But whatever, it is what it is. So that's the first story. That was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful and endearing. The second story, so this is nice. So this is at a different doctor company or whatever. It's at a doctor's office that's not with the hospital that I was just talking about. The reason I went here, this is what kind of makes it even worse. The reason I went here is because I was having issues with my CF doctors and the hospital that they're associated with, and my now ex-girlfriend works not at the doctor's office, she works at the hospital connected to the doctor's office that she referred me to. And the reason I felt comfortable going here was this wasn't a CF thing. This was, I needed a physical in order to be approved for bottom surgery. And so she was like, well, why don't you just go here? Because when she started at that place, and a really good friend of mine started working at that place, they had training on how to work with non-binary people and trans people and make sure you're like not accidentally being terrible. So of course I have my hopes up because they have all this training, so they should be good. So it started even before the doctor's appointment. I called, I said I'd like to set up an appointment, told them my name, and they put me in the system, blah, blah, blah. They said they were going to send out a packet of like different, what medications are you on, what diseases do you have, blah, 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 blah. And so I said, okay, and they mailed me my packet, and it had my dead name on it. And I legally changed my name in 2018, and this incident took place sometime in 2020. I think it was like the winter of 2020. So I had my name changed almost 3 years, because it was the beginning of 2018. Almost 3 years, and I don't even know really how they found my dead name. I don't know how that works. I'm wondering if maybe I went somewhere with that company when I was a kid that I don't remember or something. Like, I'd never been to this doctor's office before, and I didn't think I'd ever been with, that medical organization, but I guess I had. So I get my mail, and I'm like freaking out, because if I wouldn't have gotten the mail and my ex-partner's kid would have gotten the mail, she would have seen my dead name. And I think by that point my ex knew my dead name by accident, but like if she didn't, she would, like, you know what I mean? Like, that was just really careless. So I'm like, oh, this is great. So I called, and I'm like, hey, this is not my name. When I called, I set it up with Bryn. I don't know why. Like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, we can't change your name unless you're in person. And I'm like, but how do you even have my old name? But whatever. So I'm like, this is going to be amazing. I'm so excited for this. I knew it was going to cause problems. So I go in. Of course, there's a line of people, because God forbid I deal with this with no one around. And there's someone at the door, like I don't think she's like a nurse. I think she's one of the like desk people, but she was taking people's temperature because it was during COVID. So whatever, she takes my temperature, and then she like singles me out of all the people in the line, and is like, oh, I can just get you signed in on my laptop right here. And I'm like, ugh. So I tell her my name. I say, but the name that's in the system, it's the same last name, but it's a different first name. And I handed her the paper of like my name change. I said, but this is the name change. So it has my old name in your system. You need to put the new name in, because it's not my fucking name. And she like opens the paper and is reading it, and she's like, well, in the system it says, and then says my dead name. And I'm like, are you, like, why don't you listen? What is wrong with you? Like, God. So I'm like, yes, that's why I explained like twice now, right in front of you 2 seconds ago, that you need to change the name. And if you could stop shouting my dead name in front of all these people, that would be very, very nice. And she's like, but it says my dead name. Oh my God, like, stop. Like, oh, Jesus. Oh my God. So I am like, yes, that is my old name. Read the damn paper and see that it is not my name anymore. Change it in there, be discreet, and stop shouting my dead name across the office. So she's like, blah, 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 trying to fix it. And then she's like, oh, wait, I can't even do this on this laptop. I can't even get you signed in. Just go back in line. I'm like, so that was literally all for nothing. Thank you. So then I get back in line, and then I go to like the desk or whatever with someone, and I explain the same thing very like quietly, and I think she may have said my dead name. By this point I was just like, whatever, because everyone already knows it. But she caught on very quickly that I was trans, and was very nice and very respectful, and was asking me like what gender I was on insurance, because she wanted to make sure she was putting me in the system correctly and all that kind of stuff. So that was very nice. She was very nice, but that first person made me so angry and like, ugh. And I don't know, I would assume that other people are like me, but when it comes to like, oh my God, it's like hot up here. When it comes to trans things, I a lot of the times have a difficult time expressing when somebody does something wrong, if it's not intentional, because I feel bad because like they weren't trying to be like whatever, but also because I feel like I'm just gonna be looked at as like, oh, this trans person is making a big deal about things that don't matter, you know? And like, I know that's like my own issue, and like I just need to get over it, and like I've been doing better, but that's kind of how I feel. So I have a hard time like actually standing up for myself and being like, look, bitch, stop. So that's kind of how I was feeling with this one. But that also segues me into my next story. Now, this is in regards to my CF. It's back with the first hospital that I was talking about. I was in the hospital and I do this thing called a PFT, which, well, it's called a pulmonary function test, but PFT is the shortened version. And essentially it tests my lungs, my breath, all that kind of stuff, and compares it to people the same demographic as me. And so a few years ago I went, this isn't the actual story, this is like pre-story, but a few years ago when I got this done, I noticed that the person giving me my test changed my gender in the system from female to male, because I do have myself listed as female in the system. And if you have not seen my videos before, I was assigned male at birth. So she changed it to male, and I was like, oh, like, why are you doing that? And she tells me the way she words it, like, men and women have different sized lungs, and so when we're testing you because you were born male, you have to be listed as male. And I'm like, oh, well, that's a bummer, but whatever. So fast forward to the actual incident. So obviously, like, that's kind of frustrating, but whatever. But I went to get this done again, because every time I go into the hospital, I get this done. Every time I have a doctor's visit, I get this done. This is like a repetitive thing that I always have to do. And the person giving me the test was a different person that I'd seen before, but I'd never actually been with her. And either she didn't know the rules about changing my name or my gender over, or she just didn't know that I was trans and that I had been assigned male at birth. So she left me in the system as female for this test. And I didn't realize right away because I wasn't paying attention, because why would I? And then I took the test. He was wheelchairing me back to my room, and I'm looking at my copy of the test, because I always ask them to print out an extra copy for me instead of just sending it to my doctors. And I realized that the gender says female. So I'm like, oh God. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna let them figure it out. I don't want to have to deal with this. That was a big mistake. So I get back to my room, and my nurse comes in, and he's like, hey, like, just so you know, we have to change your scores or whatever, your data, because they listed you as female in the system, but because you were born male, you know, you have to have your name on, or your gender under as male. And I'm like, okay, like, I didn't tell him I already knew that, because I didn't feel like saying that. I was just like, okay. Then he's like, I guess he's worried that I feel offended or something. I'm not really sure, but he's just like, it's only because you were born male, because like, since you were born male, like, we have to compare you to other men. And he just like keeps on reiterating that I was born male. And I'm like, just sitting there, I'm like, bro, like, I got it the first time. I do not need, like, I don't care. I already know, like, shut up. And it got even worse, because I'm holding my paper, and he, like, leans into me, and he's like, I'm gonna have to take that so we can shred it. And, like, first off, that felt very dramatic, like, whatever. But second off, that's my paper. Like, not that I need it anymore, like, whatever, but still, that's mine, and you don't have a right to just take it and shred it. Not to mention, it kind of, like, low-key felt like he was shredding up my identity, so that kind of sucked, too. Like, all of it was just awful, and I felt really bad for him, because he was, like, this older gentleman. Like, I've had him a few times as my nurse, and he's a very, like, kind person. I think he just, like, doesn't know about trans stuff, which is, like, normal, but it's still frustrating. And so then I'm like, oh, he's not even, like, trying to be terrible. He's just, like, hurting my feelings again and again and again. But he just doesn't know. And it's, like, puts me in one of those predicaments where I either have to speak out and feel bad, or I shut up and feel bad. Like, either way, it's just, like, a lose-lose situation. Sorry if you can hear that motorcycle. The very last story actually does not involve my CF. This involves my bipolar disorder. I made like a video on it like a year ago, but that's it. But I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2020. I think I was diagnosed in like February or March, and I didn't start medication right away, and I ended up developing a manic episode, which was absolutely horrible. My mental health was like the worst it's ever been. So I went to the hospital that I normally get my CF treatment from, and they do not have a psych department. So I almost said they forwarded me, like like when you forward an email, what's that called? Transported? Transferred, that's the word. They transferred me to a different hospital that was about 3 hours away. And honestly, before I keep talking, this hospital was like just so horrible. Like I'm only going to be talking about the trans stuff, but like I could probably make a whole video about how horrible this hospital was. Absolutely awful. Just everything about this experience was terrible. As I said, I was having a manic episode, and if you don't really know much about bipolar, people usually describe depression as very low moods and mania as very high mood, but mine was kind of like a mixed thing. So I had, basically, my brain would not shut off. I didn't sleep for like a week, and even before that for like a month or so, I was probably sleeping anywhere between like 2 to 4 hours a night. I would wake up in the morning, like after the 2 hours, crying because I just wanted to go to sleep and I couldn't because my brain wouldn't shut off. And I wasn't eating because I was so depressed, like I couldn't force myself to eat. So my mental health, my physical health, everything was just terrible. And, you know, when you don't eat and sleep for a week, even if you're not manic, like that's obviously not going to be good. So went to the hospital, they transferred me to another hospital. They took me on an ambulance, and my mental health, as I said, was very, very terrible. And I walk in, and there's 3 people there, and they're like getting me signed in or whatever, and having me sign the thing saying, yes, you can treat me, blah, blah, blah. And like before anything, like literally anything, the one woman looks at me and she's like, hi, so you were dead name, but now you're Bryn. I was shocked. I was like, I expect this kind of stupidity, like, sometimes, but, like, the first thing you say, like, what? And not to mention, like I said, my mental health was, like, deteriorating. It was so bad. Like, I was already having extreme reactions to very, very minor things. And so this was just awful. And I did tell her, I was like, so you should never say that to a trans person. The reason we change our names is because we don't want our old names. So how about no? And I didn't say it rudely, but I was like direct. And she was like, oh, I'm sorry, I had no idea. And like, I believe she didn't have any idea, but it's still like, I had to like take all the energy that I didn't have to like educate her when she should have just, like, they should be educating people. The medical field, every medical company should be educating, like, But that's the whole story about the bipolar one. Just that she dead named me as soon as I got there, when my mental health was, like, at 0. But, yeah, so that was a lot of fun. 10 out of 10, would recommend. But yeah, so those are my stories. If you have any of your own stories that you want to share, feel free to link them down below. If you made it to the end, also let me know, because I'm always curious to see who makes it. But that's everything. I hope you all have a nice day, and I hope you enjoyed it. And again, if you did enjoy it, or even if you didn't, feel free to leave that down below, because I'm trying to branch out a little bit and do some things that I don't normally do, partially because I'm running out of topics to talk about, but also partially just because I want to have a little bit more of a horizon. So if you enjoy it, let me know. And if you don't, also let me know. All right. I hope you all have a good day.